The arena was packed to the rafters, an electric buzz coursing through the crowd as anticipation reached a fever pitch. The lights dimmed, plunging the space into a tense, almost otherworldly silence, broken only by the sound of fans chanting two names that didn't belong in the same sentence, let alone the same ring. But tonight wasn't about logic or rules. It was about something bigger. It was about answering a question so outrageous, so impossible, that it had captured the imagination of millions across the globe. What would happen if the unstoppable force of mixed martial arts met the immovable object of professional wrestling? What would happen if Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated UFC lightweight legend, faced off against Roman Reigns, the dominant WWE champion known as the Tribal Chief? In one corner, there was Khabib, a man who had redefined dominance in the octagon. His unblemished record wasn't just numbers on a page. It was a testament to years of grit, sacrifice, and relentless training in the icy mountains of Dagestan. Khabib wasn't just a fighter. He was a force of nature, a man who made his opponents look helpless as he imposed his will with surgical precision. To his fans, he was an embodiment of discipline and humility, a warrior whose focus never wavered. But in this fight, his greatest strength would also become his greatest test. Could Khabib's methodical, no-nonsense approach withstand the chaotic spectacle that was Roman Reigns? In the opposite corner stood Roman Reigns, larger than life in every sense of the word. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was an icon, a gladiator who had conquered the squared circle and established himself as the face of an empire. Roman wasn't bound by the rules of real combat, but what he lacked in authenticity, he made up for in charisma, raw power, and a theatricality that had earned him legions of loyal fans. He carried himself with the swagger of a king who knew he couldn't be dethroned. To his followers, Roman wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of resilience, a warrior who fought not just for himself, but for his bloodline. But how would his larger-than-life persona fare when stripped of the safety nets of scripted outcomes and predetermined victories? The stakes were immeasurable. This wasn't just a clash of styles, it was a clash of worlds. MMA purists scoffed at the idea, dismissing professional wrestling as fake, a mere performance. Wrestling fans fired back, arguing that their champion's presence and larger-than-life energy would overwhelm any opponent, even one as formidable as Khabib. The debate raged on, fueling an internet frenzy that turned this hypothetical matchup into a global obsession. And now, the time had come to settle it, not in words, but in the ring. The setting was as surreal as the matchup itself. A hybrid arena had been constructed, blending the raw utilitarian aesthetic of an MMA cage with the flashy, over-the-top theatrics of a WWE. Smoke machines hissed as pyrotechnics lit up the night sky, their bursts of light reflected in the eyes of an audience that couldn't believe what they were about to witness. The air was thick with tension, a palpable energy that seemed to vibrate through every fiber of the structure. It was as if the universe itself had paused, holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Khabib entered first, his signature walkout music echoing through the arena. There were no flashy lights or grand gestures, just the man himself, flanked by his team, his expression as cold and unreadable as ever. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked this road before, even if the terrain was unfamiliar. The crowd roared, a mixture of admiration and intimidation, as Khabib stepped into the ring, his eyes scanning the arena as if already plotting his next move. This wasn't a show to him. This was a fight, and he intended to win it. Then came Roman. The lights cut out completely, plunging the arena into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the murmurs of the crowd, a ripple of anticipation that spread like wildfire. And then, with a deafening roar, the stage exploded into life. Roman Reigns emerged, his presence commanding the room like a tidal wave. Drenched in a golden spotlight, His iconic entrance music blared as he slowly made his way down the ramp, his championship belt slung casually over his shoulder. The tribal chief was here, and he wanted everyone to know it. Roman took his time, soaking in the adoration of his fans, his every move calculated to heighten the drama. By the time he stepped into the ring, the atmosphere was electric. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. On one side, Khabib stood stoic and silent, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash a torrent of controlled violence. On the other, Roman exuded a magnetic confidence, his every gesture a proclamation that this was his house, his arena, his moment. The crowd was split, each half roaring their allegiance, creating a cacophony of sound that seemed almost too big for the space to contain. And then the bell rang. The opening moments were a study in contrasts. Khabib moved like a predator, his movements economical, his eyes locked onto Roman with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Roman, for his part, seemed almost amused, his lips curling into a smirk as he circled the ring, playing to the crowd with the swagger of a man who had nothing to fear. But beneath that bravado, there was a flicker of something else, uncertainty, perhaps. After all, Roman was used to scripts, to knowing how the story ended before it even began. Tonight, there were no guarantees. Khabib shot in for a takedown, his speed catching Roman off guard. In an instant, the two men were on the mat, and it was clear that Khabib's grappling was on another level. Roman struggled to break free, his size and strength working against him as Khabib locked him into a position that left little room for theatrics. But just as it seemed like Khabib was about to assert his dominance, Roman used his raw power to push back, forcing a separation that sent both men to their feet. The crowd erupted, and for the first time, Roman's expression hardened. This wasn't going to be easy. As the match unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a physical contest. It was a psychological one. Khabib's relentless pressure was met with Roman's sheer resilience, each man refusing to give an inch. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, their cheers and jeers blending into a symphony of chaos that seemed to fuel the fighters. Every move, every strike, every counter was met with an explosion of sound, the energy in the room feeding into the drama unfolding in the ring. But then something happened, something no one could have predicted. Khabib, in the midst of executing a flawless takedown, hesitated for a split second. It was barely noticeable, a flicker of uncertainty that passed through his eyes like a shadow. Roman seized the moment, delivering a thunderous blow that sent Khabib reeling. The crowd gasped, their collective shock reverberating through the arena. For the first time in his career, Khabib looked vulnerable. For a moment, the arena seemed frozen in time, the shock of Khabib's stumble hanging in the air like a thundercloud. The invincible had shown a crack, however small, and Roman Reigns, ever the opportunist, wasted no time capitalizing on it. He moved with the kind of explosive aggression that had made him a legend in his own domain, driving Khabib into the ropes with a flurry of powerful strikes. Each blow sent a shockwave through the crowd, drawing roars of approval from Roman's fans and murmurs of unease from Khabib's loyal followers. The dynamic of the fight was shifting, and with it, the mood in the arena. But Khabib was no stranger to adversity. He had faced monsters in the octagon, men whose only goal was to destroy him, and he had always come out on top. Even now, as Roman's sheer physicality bore down on him, there was no panic in his eyes, only focus. Khabib slipped out from under Roman's assault, his movements fluid and precise, and in the blink of an eye, he turned the tables. A swift leg sweep brought Roman crashing to the mat, the sound of his fall echoing through the arena. Khabib pounced, his grappling expertise on full display as he sought to lock in a submission. The crowd erupted once more, split between those cheering for Khabib's technical brilliance and those willing Roman to break free. But just as it seemed Khabib was about to regain control, Roman unleashed a primal roar, using his sheer strength to power out of the hold. He pushed Khabib away, with a force that sent him tumbling across the ring. Roman rose to his feet, his chest heaving, his face a mask of defiance. The tribal chief wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to prove he belonged. As the match continued, the tension only grew. Every move, every counter, every near fall was met with a thunderous response from the crowd. The two men were polar opposites in almost every way, yet in the ring, they were equals. Khabib's precision and discipline clashed with Roman's raw power and theatrical flair, creating a spectacle unlike anything the world had ever seen. It wasn't just a fight, it was a battle of philosophies, a war between two worlds. Behind the scenes, the stakes were just as high. This wasn't merely a crossover event, it was a calculated gamble by the organizers, a bold attempt to bridge the gap between two massive fan bases. For years, MMA and professional wrestling had existed in parallel, each boasting its own loyal following but rarely overlapping. Tonight's fight was meant to change that, to prove that these two worlds could collide in a way that was both entertaining and meaningful. But not everyone was on board. In the weeks leading up to the fight, whispers of controversy had swirled. Hardcore MMA fans had criticized the event, accusing Khabib of tarnishing his legacy by stepping into what they saw as a fake fight. Wrestling purists, on the other hand, had questioned Roman's decision to face an opponent who wasn't bound by the unspoken rules of their craft. The pressure on both men was immense, and it showed in their performances. This wasn't just about winning, it was about silencing the doubters, about proving to themselves and the world that they were more than the sum of their parts. Adding another layer of complexity was the presence of an enigmatic figure watching from the shadows. Dressed in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat, the man observed the fight with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. No one knew who he was or why he was there, but his presence had not gone unnoticed. Speculation ran wild among the commentators, who wondered aloud whether he was a talent scout, a promoter, or something more sinister. Whatever the case, his interest in the fight was undeniable, and his reactions subtle nods. The occasional smirk suggested he knew something the rest of the world didn't. Meanwhile, the fight continued to escalate. Roman, feeding off the energy of the crowd, began to incorporate some of his signature WWA moves, adapting them to the hybrid rule set. At one point, he hoisted Khabib into the air for a devastating powerbomb, the impact shaking the ring and drawing gasps from the audience. Khabib, ever the strategist, responded by targeting Roman's legs, using low kicks and sweeps to neutralize his power. The two men were pushing each other to their limits, and the toll was beginning to show. Sweat poured from their bodies, their breathing grew labored, and yet neither man was willing to back down. As the clock ticked down, the atmosphere in the arena reached a boiling point. The crowd was on its feet, the energy almost unbearable, as they watched the two warriors give everything they had. And then, just when it seemed the fight couldn't get any more intense, Khabib did something no one expected. He stepped back, raised his hand, and signaled for a pause. Roman, confused but wary, followed suit, the two men standing a few feet apart as the referee hesitated, unsure of what was happening. The crowd fell silent, their confusion mirrored by the commentators, who scrambled to make sense of the situation. Khabib walked to the center of the ring, his expression unreadable, and motioned for Roman to join him. The two men stood face to face, their eyes locked in a stare that seemed to transcend the fight itself. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, Khabib extended his hand. Roman hesitated, his instincts telling him it was a trap, but something in Khabib's eyes stopped him. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out and shook Khabib's hand. The crowd erupted, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else, and for a moment, it seemed as though the fight might end in a gesture of mutual respect. But just as quickly as the moment came, it was shattered. The mysterious figure in the shadows rose from his seat, his sudden movement drawing the attention of the entire arena. He began to make his way toward the ring, his every step deliberate, his presence sending a ripple of unease through the crowd. The fighters, sensing the shift in energy, turned to face him, their rivalry momentarily forgotten in the face of this new, unknown threat. The man stopped at the edge of the ring, his face still partially hidden, and raised a microphone to his lips. His voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the arena as he spoke a single sentence that sent chills down everyone's spine. The mysterious figure's words hung in the air, their ominous weight suffocating the once deafening crowd. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary, it was charged, as if the very air in the arena had thickened. Khabib and Roman exchanged a glance, a rare moment of unspoken understanding passing between them. For all their differences, for all the intensity of their battle, they were both warriors, and they recognized a greater threat when they saw one. The man at ringside wasn't here to admire their fight. He was here to change everything. Without warning, the arena lights flickered, plunging the space into momentary darkness. Gasps rippled through the crowd as phones lit up, their tiny screens illuminating a sea of confused faces. When the lights snapped back on, the man was no longer standing at the edge of the ring. He was inside it, standing between Khabib and Roman as if he had simply materialized there. His face, now fully visible, bore a calm, almost unsettling expression, his eyes scanning the two fighters like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've both proven yourselves," he began, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But this is child's play compared to what's coming. You think tonight is about who's better, the grappler or the powerhouse, the fighter or the entertainer. No, tonight is about survival." The crowd erupted into murmurs, the confusion palpable. Khabib and Roman, their instincts on high alert, took cautious steps back, their eyes never leaving the man. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge their movements. Instead, he raised a hand, snapping his fingers with a sharp, echoing crack. The ring shook violently, an unnatural tremor that sent shockwaves through the arena. The ropes snapped taut, glowing faintly as if charged with energy. A low hum filled the air, and the crowd, now on its feet, began to panic. Something was happening, something no one could explain. Khabib and Roman steadied themselves, their rivalry momentarily forgotten as the ground beneath them seemed to shift and warp. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the ring split open. From the dark void that emerged, a blinding light shot upward, illuminating the arena in an eerie glow. The crowd fell silent again, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. Figures began to rise from the fissure, strange, shadowy shapes that defied logic, their forms shifting and pulsating as if they weren't entirely bound by the rules of this world. They weren't human. That much was clear. The man in the suit stepped aside, gesturing toward the creatures as though presenting a gift. "Welcome," he said with a smirk, "to the real main event. Let's see if the two of you can survive together when the odds are stacked against you." Khabib and Roman moved instinctively, their bodies snapping into fighting stances. Whatever these things were, they weren't going to wait for introductions. The first creature lunged, its movements unnaturally fast, its limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Khabib dodged with milliseconds to spare, countering with a lightning-fast takedown that sent the creature crashing to the mat. It writhed and screeched, its body contorting in pain but not stopping. Roman, meanwhile, caught another mid-air with a thunderous Superman punch, the impact echoing like a gunshot. The creature staggered but didn't fall, its glowing eyes fixed on him with unrelenting fury. The crowd, now caught between terror and awe, couldn't tear their eyes away. This wasn't a fight anymore, it was a war. And somehow, the two rivals who had been trying to destroy each other moments ago were now forced to fight side by side against an enemy neither of them understood. As Khabib and Roman battled the creatures, their contrasting styles began to complement each other in unexpected ways. Khabib's precision and ground game kept the creatures pinned and immobilized, while Roman's raw power and explosive strikes dealt devastating blows. They were adapting, learning to trust each other in a way that neither had ever imagined possible. And yet, the creatures kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. The mysterious man watched from the edge of the ring, his expression one of amusement. "Fascinating," he muttered to himself, his voice just loud enough to be picked up by the cameras. "Perhaps they're stronger than I anticipated." Backstage, the chaos wasn't confined to the ring. Security guards, referees, and organizers scrambled to figure out what was happening, their attempts to reassert control proving futile. Among them was a young production assistant who'd been monitoring the fight's live feed. As the creatures emerged, her screen had begun to glitch, strange symbols and unreadable text flashing across it. She felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't a malfunction. This was deliberate. Digging deeper into the feed, she discovered something chilling. The symbols weren't random, they were coordinates. But to where? And why were they being embedded into a live broadcast? Her hands trembled as she tried to trace the signal, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. All she knew was that this fight, this event, was part of something much bigger than anyone had realized. Back in the ring, the tide of the battle was shifting. Khabib and Roman were holding their own, but the creatures were relentless, their attacks becoming more coordinated, almost intelligent. It was as if they were learning, adapting to the fighters' strategies. For every creature that fell, two more seemed to take its place, their glowing eyes filled with an almost mechanical determination. Khabib, his breathing heavy, but his focus unbroken, glanced at Roman. "Any ideas, big guy?" he asked, his voice calm despite the chaos. Roman smirked, wiping blood from his lip. "Yeah," he said, stepping forward to shield Khabib from an oncoming attack. "We hit harder." Their moment of camaraderie was interrupted by a deafening roar, louder and more guttural than anything they'd heard so far. The creatures froze, their heads snapping toward the fissure as if summoned. From the glowing void emerged a new figure, larger and more menacing than the rest. Its form was humanoid but exaggerated, its muscles rippling beneath a metallic sheen, its eyes burning like twin suns. It radiated power, and its presence seemed to sap the energy from the room. The crowd, already on edge, erupted into chaos. Some screamed, some ran, and others stood frozen, their eyes locked on the monstrous figure as it stepped into the ring. Even Khabib and Roman, seasoned fighters who had faced some of the toughest opponents in the world, hesitated. This wasn't just another challenge. This was something else entirely. The mysterious man smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Ah," he said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "The champion has arrived." The monstrous figure stood in the center of the ring, dwarfing everything around it. The air seemed to vibrate with its presence, a low hum reverberating through the arena as though the creature itself was a living force of nature. Khabib and Roman instinctively adjusted their stances, their bodies taut with readiness, despite the exhaustion etched into their movements. Whatever this thing was, it was different, stronger, faster, and more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. The crowd, though terrified, couldn't look away. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a moment that defied reason, a spectacle so surreal it felt like a fever dream. The mysterious man in the suit watched from the edge of the ring, his smirk widening as he surveyed the chaos he had orchestrated. The creature roared again, the sound piercing and primal, and charged forward with terrifying speed. Khabib was the first to move, diving low and executing a perfectly timed single-leg takedown. But the creature didn't fall. Instead, It twisted in mid-air, its movements impossibly fluid, and swatted Khabib away like a rag doll. He hit the ropes hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him, but not his resolve. Roman, seizing the opening, unleashed a devastating spear that collided with the creature's midsection. The impact was enough to stagger it, but not for long. It recovered almost instantly, its glowing eyes now locked on Roman with a terrifying focus. "What is this thing?" Roman growled, his voice tinged with both frustration and determination. Khabib, pulling himself to his feet, shook his head. "Doesn't matter," he replied, his voice steady. "It bleeds, we win." The two fighters exchanged a nod, an unspoken pact forming between them. This wasn't about ego or showmanship anymore. This was survival. They attacked together, their moves synchronized in a way that seemed almost instinctual. Roman's strength and power created openings, while Khabib's precision and grappling expertise exploited them. The creature, for all its size and speed, seemed momentarily overwhelmed, its movements growing less fluid as the two fighters pressed their advantage. The crowd began to cheer, their fear giving way to hope, as they watched the unlikely duo begin to turn the tide. But just when it seemed the creature might fall, the mysterious man stepped into the ring. With a wave of his hand, the creature froze, its body locking into place like a statue. The fighters stopped too, their confusion mirrored by the audience. The man's smirk widened as he turned to address the crowd. "Impressive," he said, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "You've entertained me more than I expected. But this was never about the fight, was it?" Khabib and Roman exchanged wary glances, neither lowering their guard. The man continued, his tone growing darker. "This was a test. A test of strength, of will, of the ability to adapt. You've both passed, barely." With that, he snapped his fingers again, and the creature dissolved into a cascade of glowing particles that vanished into the air. The fissure in the ring closed, the hum faded, and the arena lights returned to normal. The chaos was over, but the unease lingered. "Who are you?" Khabib demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. The man turned to him, his smirk finally fading. "I am a messenger," he said simply. "And this was just the beginning. Prepare yourselves. The real fight is yet to come." Before either fighter could respond, the man stepped back into the shadows and vanished as abruptly as he had appeared. The arena was left in stunned silence, the crowd struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Khabib and Roman stood in the ring, their bodies battered, but their spirits unbroken. For all their differences, for all the chaos of the night, they had emerged as survivors. As the announcer hesitantly stepped back into the ring to declare the match inconclusive, the camera lingered on Khabib and Roman. The tension between them was gone, replaced by a mutual respect that needed no words. They had fought, not just against each other, but against something far greater, and they had won, if only for now. But the final twist came after the broadcast had ended. Backstage, the young production assistant who had discovered the strange coordinates finally managed to trace their origin. Her face paled as the results appeared on her screen. The coordinates pointed to a remote, uncharted location in the Arctic Circle. Alongside them, a single line of text appeared, written in the same strange symbols that had disrupted the broadcast. "Initiation successful. Phase 2 begins." The screen went black, leaving her staring at her own reflection. Whatever had happened, tonight wasn't over. It was only the beginning of something far more sinister, something that neither Khabib nor Roman or anyone else could have anticipated. In the ring, the two fighters slowly made their way out, the weight of the night pressing on them. The crowd cheered for them, their loyalty undivided now, but both men knew this was more than a victory or a loss. It was a warning. And as they walked back up the ramp, side by side, they couldn't shake the feeling that their fates were now intertwined, bound together by forces neither of them could yet understand. The cameras cut to black, leaving the audience with one last image: the empty ring, still faintly glowing, as if the energy of the night's events lingered there, waiting for what came next.